This is a presentation on the life and leadership of Florence Nightingale. Lady with the Lamp, Angel of the Crimea, Ministering Angel, Almoner of the Free Gifts, the Lady-in-Chief, and the Heroine of the Hour are just a few of the names bestowed upon Florence Nightingale for her sacrificial service to others. By looking at the life of Florence Nightingale and her contributions to others, healthcare, sanitation, and military reforms, this presentation will support the fact that Florence Nightingale is considered a leader, according to the trait, skills, behavioral, path goal, and servant leadership theories. Throughout this presentation, we will look at a brief overview of Florence's biography. We will study 5 leadership theories, make some scriptural comparisons, and then have a brief conclusion. Florence Nightingale was born on May 12, 1820, to William and Fanny Nightingale in Florence, Italy, which is how she got her name. Florence had one sister, Parthenope, who is also named after an Italian city. The Nightingales were considered a wealthy family. They had 3 family estates, Lea Hall, Lea Hurst, and Embley Park. In keeping with the protocol of the Victorian era, the Nightingales hired Miss Sarah Christie to be the governess for Parthenope and Florence. When Miss Christie married, William Nightingale decided he would continue his daughter's education himself. Mr. Nightingale wanted to educate his daughters beyond what was typical for a young English lady to learn. So he taught his girls history, philosophy, and many languages, including Greek, Latin, German, Italian, and French. Florence loved learning new things and became very proficient in her studies. Although Florence did learn the traditional lessons of young English ladies, such as painting, drawing, needlework, and how to keep house, she preferred the unladylike subjects of physics, chemistry, astronomy, and mathematics. Florence developed a love for nursing and caring for others at a young age. Both William and Fanny came from large families, and with such large families, someone was bound to be sick with one sickness or another at all times, so Florence began keeping a journal of records of her relatives' illnesses and the remedies of each illness at the age of 9. She would use these remedies on her sick dolls as she cared for them. Florence also treated and healed sick or injured animals. In 1837, an influenza broke out among the Nightingale household, and Florence helped to care for her ailing family members and the ailing servants at Embley Park. At the age of 16, on February 7, 1837, Florence had an incredible experience. While alone in her bedroom one night after caring for the ailing at Embley Park, Florence heard the voice of God speaking her name, calling her to a life of service. Florence was not quite sure what this calling was, but on that day she committed to follow God wherever He would lead her for the rest of her life. It did not take Florence long to come to the belief God was calling her towards nursing. So Florence asked her parents if she could go to the Salisbury Infirmary to study to become a nurse. This outraged her parents because nursing was not a reputable profession for young ladies, and they refused to let Florence go. This devastated Florence, yet she did not give up. She began leading kind of a double life. During the day, she would play the role of a Victorian English lady, doing what was expected of her from her family and society, but at night, Florence would study anything she could find on health, diseases, and nursing. She would meet Madre Santa Colomba, who encouraged Florence to follow God's calling no matter what the risk. God called her a second time. This time, Florence was impressed to go on with the call of nursing, regardless of what her family said or the reputation to herself or thought of herself. On her 30th birthday, Florence's life's purpose became, "O Lord, thy will, thy will." In 1850, Florence had the opportunity of visiting Kaiserswerth Institute, where she got to observe nurses in training, and this only intensified Florence's desires to become a nurse. At the age of 32, Florence got the opportunity she had been waiting for. She was hired to become the superintendent of the care of sick gentlewomen, which was a nursing home for retired governesses. Florence immediately began making improvements to the buildings, how things were run, the quality of care of the patients. She lifted the religious restrictions that were being carried out there because they did not allow Catholic women to attend the institution. So her lifting of this restriction allowed everyone to be admitted regardless of their religion. She cared for many during the cholera outbreak, and she would use what she learned during this outbreak later on in her life as a nurse. On March 28, 1854, Britain and France declared war on Russia, which led them into the Crimean War. There was a report written about how poorly the hospitals and the army camps and barracks were set up and run, and so this set Florence off on a new goal and mission. She was determined to do what she could do to improve the condition of the hospitals. So in October of 1854, she accepted the position of superintendent of the English military hospitals in Turkey. She oversaw 40 nurses, and she began her job at the Barrack Hospital in Scutari. Upon her arrival, though, she received a lot of opposition from the doctors. The doctors did not want Florence or the nurses there. They thought that the woman would be useless. They wouldn't have the capability, the knowledge, or even the strength or fortitude to care for the sick and wounded. They thought the woman would try to take over, and so they just deposed Florence and the nurses at every corner. But this did not discourage Florence. She did not back down, and she ended up saving thousands of lives by improving the way patients were cared for, and making improvements to the hospital and to the sanitation in the hospitals. It was through her work during the Crimean War that earned her the numerous names that were bestowed upon her. These names were given to her from grateful patients, reporters, and even Queen Victoria. Lady with the Lamp may be the name that Florence is most recognized by. So Florence would be seen by doctors, nurses, and the patients going up and down the hospital with a lamp each night, looking in on the patients. It said that she was be on her feet sometimes 20 or more hours a day. She would pray for the patients, take care of them, write letters for them, listen to them, whatever they needed, Florence would do. Many patients call her their angel in their time of need. Florence would continue to make changes throughout the Crimean Peninsula. She would visit war hospitals and army camps and made positive changes in each of these places. However, she contracted the Crimean fever while there, and sadly, she would never return to full strength of health again. She did not let her poor health stop her, though, from fighting for healthcare improvements. Once the Crimean War was over, she quietly returned home to England, not wanting any glory or recognition or accolades for herself. And she immediately began work on healthcare, sanitation, and army reforms. She wrote several books and many reports on ways to improve healthcare. She did something that was rather unusual. She would include the use of statistics, graphs, and charts to support her findings, along with the data she had collected during her time in the Crimean. And because of her work with statistics, she was admitted into the Royal Statistical Society in 1858. By using statistics, graphs, and charts, this allowed many people to understand what Florence was trying to say, which led to many healthcare and sanitation reforms. Florence invented the coxcomb, which is now known today as the pie chart. Many said Florence had the Nightingale power, which enabled her to do things that nobody else could do. She got these reforms passed and improved healthcare and sanitations in the army barracks in ways that no one else had before. So many people were grateful for the work Florence did during the Crimean War that they established the Nightingale Fund to be used to start the Nightingale School of Nursing. The school opened on July 9, 1860, with 15 students. Although Florence's health prevented her from overseeing the nurses personally, she was still very active in the nursing school. She appointed Sarah Elizabeth Wardroper as the superintendent of the school, and she laid out for Sarah how the school should be run and set up and what the nurses should be taught. The nurses would write regular reports to Florence on what they were learning, and Florence would write back with advice and encouragement. When Florence's health would allow, the nurses would go to Florence's house and report to her in person. Upon seeing the success and the benefits and the good that the Nightingale School was doing, other hospitals and schools opened to resemble the Nightingale School. Florence continued to make improvements and to be influential in changing the healthcare profession throughout the rest of her life. She would write many books on nursing and hospital protocol that were used and are still being used today. She was even influential in improving the conditions of the workhouses in England and in improving the sanitary and health conditions in India. Because of her influence, King Edward VII bestowed upon her the Order of Merit and the Freedom of the City of London. At the age of 90, on August 13, 1910, Florence died in her sleep. Now we'll look at several leadership theories and compare them to Florence to see if she would be considered a leader. According to the trait approach, would Florence Nightingale be considered a leader? The trait approach suggests people are born with special traits that will make them great leaders. Florence exhibits several traits that made her a great leader. Her intelligence came through in the numerous reports she wrote on reforming hospitals and sanitation. She was determined to make a difference in nursing regardless of the many obstacles she faced. One can see her diligence in the hard work she put forth to care for others. According to Lytton Strachey, Florence was able to accomplish goals by stern discipline, rigid attention to detail, ceaseless labor, and a fixed determination of an indomitable will. So, according to the trait approach, Florence Nightingale would be considered a leader. According to the skills approach, would Florence be considered a leader? The skills approach focuses on a leader's ability to use one's knowledge and skills to accomplish goals. Florence became proficient at nursing and writing reports demonstrating her technical skills. Florence's human skills shine through in how she cared for her patients. She always put the patient's needs before herself. Florence's conceptual skills show in her ability to put her ideas into action. Her ideas on nursing have forever changed the nursing profession. So according to the skills theory, Florence Nightingale would be considered a leader. According to the behavioral approach, would Florence Nightingale be considered a leader? The behavioral approach says leaders have two types of behaviors, task and relationship, and leaders use these behaviors to influence others. Florence was very task-oriented. When she had a job to do, she would not stop until the job was completed. She was influential in changing how hospitals are organized and run, and she wrote many policies that are still in use today in the medical field. Although she was more of a task-oriented leader, she did exhibit relationship behaviors when she made the working conditions better for her nurses, improved the living conditions of the sick, and by how she cared for many wounded and sick. So according to the behavioral theory, Florence Nightingale would be considered a leader. According to the path-goal approach, would Florence Nightingale be considered a leader? The focus of the path-goal theory is on how leaders motivate their followers to accomplish goals. Florence had many goals, but they are all focused around one primary goal, which was to improve health and sanitation conditions. Everything Florence did, from writing health reforms to training nurses to purchasing necessary items for the hospitals, was to improve health and sanitation conditions so people could be healed. Florence removed the obstacles that were in her path, such as opposition from the doctors, the lack of funds and supplies, and even going against society and what was expected of her as an English lady. Within the path-goal approach, Florence exhibits a directive style of leadership. She gives clear and precise directions to her followers. She would not take excuses for why a job was not getting done, but instead found a way to get that job done. So, according to the path-goal theory, Florence Nightingale would be considered a leader. According to the servant leadership approach, would Florence Nightingale be considered a leader? A servant leader is ethical and will lead in ways that serve the greater good of the organization, community, and society. Florence was very concerned with the greater good of hospitals, community, and society. In fact, she was more concerned with how she could help others than she was about herself, even at the sacrifice of her own health. While some may argue that Florence was not much of a servant to her followers at the beginning of her life, she did learn to become a servant to her followers. However, Florence was always a servant to her many patients. Florence exhibited the 10 characteristics of a servant leader, such as listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of others, and building community, and how she cared for patients. These characteristics allow Florence to see the big picture when it came to healthcare, to knowing what her patients and nurses needed, to persuading others to help improve healthcare, and to making things better for the patients, nurses, and doctors. So according to the servant leadership approach, Florence Nightingale would be considered a leader. Now let's look at some biblical and scriptural comparisons to Florence Nightingale's life. Florence knew God had called her to nursing, regardless of what anyone said, and though they questioned Florence Nightingale, Florence did not give up. She refused to give up. She continued to do what God called her to do. This reminded me of Noah. Noah knew God called him to build the ark. Although others did not understand Noah's calling, even thought he was crazy, Noah refused to give up, and he continued doing what God called him to do. Florence showed bravery and courage throughout her life. It took courage to go against societal norms for an English lady to become a nurse. It took bravery to attend to the sick and wounded and to visit the war-torn lands of the Crimea. Joshua also had great bravery and courage. In Joshua 1, verses 1 and 9, we are commanded to be strong and of a good courage. This is exactly what Joshua did, as he led the children of Israel into the Promised Land and fought many battles, including the Battle of Jericho. Florence, I believe, exhibited strong courage and bravery as she served and helped others in the Crimea, England, and India. Esther teaches us to never give up on our Christian calling, even when it may seem hopeless. I believe Florence learned this lesson as well as she continued to pursue God's call, even though it seemed she would never get the opportunity to serve as a nurse. Esther was called for such a time as this, and Florence believed she was called for a specific time and purpose as well. Matthew 5:7a says, "Blessed are the merciful." Many used the word merciful to describe Florence. Queen Victoria used this verse to describe Florence, and she even had it inscribed on the Nightingale jewel that you can see pictured here, that Queen Victoria bestowed upon Florence as a token of gratitude for all of her work during the Crimea. Florence used the book of Romans and the pamphlet she wrote entitled The Institution of Kaiserswerth on the Rhine to explore the origins of nursing in early Christianity. She used the references in Romans 16:1-3 and Romans 16:6 to talk about Phoebe, Priscilla, and Mary, arguing that women had been called to serve God as nurses since the Pauline Age. Some closing thoughts on the life of Florence Nightingale. Would Florence Nightingale be considered a leader? Florence Nightingale never sought attention, credit, or accolades for herself. In fact, she gave God the credit for her accomplishments when she said, "How inefficient I was in the Crimea, yet he has raised up trained nursing from it." She went against society to serve God's calling on her life as a nurse. She persevered and never gave up when things were tough and people were against her. Even though Florence was very intelligent, she realized that she was human, and she was the first to admit her mistakes in the hopes others could learn from them. By standing up for and fighting for her beliefs that healthcare and sanitation are important to the healing of patients, through hard work, determination, and performing her duties, Florence forever changed the healthcare profession. Many of the sanitation rituals we use today and the way hospitals are set up and operated can be traced back to Florence's influence. Although Florence Nightingale never considered herself a leader, I do believe Florence Nightingale was a great leader who will forever have an impact on healthcare, the nursing profession, and how hospitals are run. Here are the lists of the references that I used as I studied and learned about the life and leadership of Florence Nightingale.